Hello, I'm David Stephen Cohen, and this is an updating of a talk titled The 1619 Project and Critical Race Theory in North Carolina. In August 2019, the New York Times Magazine published The 1619 Project, an attempt to retell American history from the perspective of slavery and the African American experience. The premise of the project was to consider 1619, the year that the first slave ship arrived in Virginia, rather than 1776, the date of the Declaration of Independence, as the birth date of America. Quote, the goal of the 1619 project is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619 as our nation's birth year, wrote J. Silverstein, the editor of the New York Times Magazine. Quote, doing so requires us to replace the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a country. The publication consisted of 10 essays, poems, and fiction from a variety of authors. The idea for the project came from Nicole Hannah-Jones, a staff writer for The Times. Ms. Hannah-Jones was born in Waterloo, Iowa, to an African-American father and a white mother who was of Czech and English descent. She attended an all-white high school as part of a voluntary desegregation busing program. After attaining a bachelor's degree in history and African American studies from the University of Notre Dame, she attended the University of North Carolina's Hussman School of Journalism and Media as a Roy H. Park Fellow. She began her journalism career at the Raleigh News and Observer and then moved to Portland, Oregon, where she wrote for the Oregonian. Between 2008 and 2009, she traveled to Cuba with a fellowship from the Institute for Advanced Journalism. She then joined the nonprofit news organization ProPublica, based in New York City. She began working for the New York Times in 2016. The following year, she won a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. And in 2020, she won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary based on the 1619 project. The Pulitzer Center in June 2020 published a curriculum guide based on the 1619 project for grades K through 12. In December 2019, 12 scholars from major universities wrote a letter to Jake Silverstein. Scholars noted that it was not their purpose, quote, to question the significance of slavery in the American past, unquote. However, they said, quote, as historians and students of the founding and the Civil War era, our concern is that the 1619 project offers a historically limited view of slavery, especially since slavery was not just or even exclusively an American malady and grew up in a larger context of forced labor and race. Moreover, the breadth of 400 years and 300 million people cannot be compressed into a single-size interpretation. Yet, the 1619 project asserts that every aspect of American life has only one lens for viewing, that of slavery and its fallout, unquote. Mr. Silverstein at first refused to publish the letter, but he did allow the History News Network to publish his refutation of some of the details in the letter. But when Silverstein received another letter from 5 distinguished professors, including Victoria Bynum of Texas State University, James McPherson and Sean Wilentz of Princeton University, James Oakes from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and Gordon S. Wood of Brown University, he did agree to publish it. They pointed out some of the factual errors in the publication, which, quote, suggest a displacement of historical understanding with ideology, unquote. For example, quote, the project asserts that the founders declared the colony's independence of Britain in order to ensure slavery would continue. This is not true, unquote. Another distortion is the claim that, for the most part, black Americans have fought for their freedom struggles alone. Still, other material is misleading. The project criticized Abraham Lincoln's view on racial equality, but ignores his conviction that the Declaration of Independence proclaimed universal equality for blacks as well as whites, a view upheld repeatedly against powerful white supremacists who opposed him. The project ignores Lincoln's agreement with Frederick Douglass that the Constitution was, in Douglass's words, a glorious liberty document. Instead, the project asserts that the United States was founded on racial slavery, an argument rejected by major abolitionists and proclaimed by champions of slavery like John C. Calhoun. The historians asked the Times to make prominent corrections of the errors and distortions from any material to be used in the schools and in all future publications. Mr. Silverstein's response was to reject any notion that the project was driven by ideology rather than a historical understanding, and rejected the need for corrections. He admitted that neither he nor Ms. Hannah-Jones are historians, but he says as journalists, they are trained to look at current events and situations and ask questions. Why is this the way it is, unquote. He noted that the Times assembled numerous scholars of African American studies and related fields to consult on the project. Quote, as the five letter writers well know, there are often debates, even among subject area experts, about how to see the past. Historical understanding is not fixed. It is constantly being adjusted by new scholarship and new voices. Within the world of academic history, different views exist, if not over what precisely happened, then why it happened and who made it happen, and how to interpret motivations of historical accurates, and what it all means, unquote. However, Silverstein defended Hannah-Jones's claim that one of the primary reasons for the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. He quotes a 1772 decision of the British High Court in Somerset v. Stewart, in which the court declared it was unlawful for a slave brought to England who escaped and was recaptured to be sold to Jamaica because the chattel slavery was not supported by English common law. While the decision did not affect the colonies directly, it was widely reported in America. He also cited the Dunmore Proclamation of 1775, in which the British colonial governor of Virginia offered freedom to any slave who escaped and joined the British Army. He quotes historian Jill Lepore, who wrote that the Dunmore Proclamation tipped the scales in favor of American independence, unquote. But this does not make the defense of slavery one of the primary reasons for independence. There were 28 charges against the King of England made in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson wanted to include a 29th, blaming the King of England for the introduction of the slave trade, but it was eliminated from the final draft. Silverstein also defended Ms. Hannah-Jones against being fairly harsh on Abraham Lincoln. Quote, admittedly, in an essay that covered several centuries and ranged from the personal to the historical, he wrote, she did not set out to explore in full continually shifting ideas about abolition and the rights of Black Americans. But she provided an important historical lesson by simply reminding the public, which tends to view Lincoln as a saint, that for much of his career he believed that a necessary prerequisite for freedom would be a plan to encourage 4 million former enslaved people to leave the country. What Silverstein fails to mention that a significant number of free African Americans agreed with Lincoln and voluntarily went back to Africa to found the country of Liberia. And in the early 20th century, Marcus Garvey embraced the Back to Africa movement. No matter what a person may think about the 1619 Project as a publication, the effort to incorporate it into the teaching of history in the schools has had the effect of politicizing the teaching of history from the point of view of only one ethnic group. The first two slides of their proposed curriculum further the argument that it is an exercise in ideology rather than critical thinking by suggesting that she, Nicole Hannah-Jones, has the only truth and that previous curricula are, quote, committing educational malpractice, unquote. The third slide has the following heading, quote, the goal of the 1619 Project is to reframe American history, making explicit how slavery is the foundation on which this country is built. For generations, we have not been adequately taught this history. Our hope is to paint a fuller picture of the institution that shaped our nation. The Reader's Guide for the 1619 Project essays, which was published on the Pulitzer Center's website, offers a preview of the problem of basing the curriculum on this project. The index below offers an index of the guiding questions based on the 18 essays included in the 1619 Project. It has an excerpt from Hannah-Jones's essay, not from a primary source, and asks the following leading questions. 1. How have laws, policies, and systems developed to enforce the enslavement of Black Americans before the Civil War influenced laws, policies, and systems in the years since? And 2, how has activism by Black Americans throughout U.S. history led to policies that benefit all people living in the United States? As a historian with some experience in writing lesson plans and the core curriculum content standards in 2004 in New Jersey, I think this is an example of the wrong way to teach history. Rather than reading and analyzing primary sources, this asks the students to comment on only one point of view, that of Nicole Hannah-Jones. It would be far better for the students to read the Declaration of Independence and Samuel Johnson's Taxation No Tyranny, an answer to the resolutions and address of the American Congress, and to comment on what is mentioned and not mentioned in each of these documents. A related issue is the attempt to impose a single point of view that slavery was the single cause of the Civil War. While this may be an option of many historians today, there is a value in having students evaluate different points of view of the powers within the federal government, within federalism of the federal government versus the states. This would include reading and debating the Virginia resolutions written by James Madison and the Kentucky resolution written by Alexander Hamilton, both in 1798, that proposed that the states had the right to declare unconstitutional or nullify alien and sedition laws passed under President John Adams, and the resolutions of the Hartford Convention of 1814, in which New England states asserted that the actions of the federal government during the War of 1812 were void and to interpose their authority against these actions, and the South Carolina Ordinance of Nullification of 1832, in which South Carolina, supported by Vice President John C. Calhoun, declared null and void the federal tariffs of 1828 and 1832, and President Andrew Jackson's proclamation regarding nullification, in which he threatened to send federal troops to enforce the tariffs. and the declaration of the immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of South Carolina from the federal union in 1860 versus Abraham Lincoln's statement that the cause of the Civil War in his second inaugural speech of 1865 was all about slavery. In April 2021, Nicole Hannah-Jones was appointed the Knight Chair of Race and Investigative Journalism at the Houseman School of Journalism at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. While previous holders of the chair were granted tenure, Hannah-Jones was offered a 5-year contract with the option for review and tenure. The dean of the School of Journalism, Susan King, touted Hannah-Jones's credentials as having been awarded a MacArthur Genius Fellowship and having received a Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her introductory essay to the 1619 Project. The faculty of the School of Journalism recommended that she be granted tenure, but the Board of Governors, most of whom were appointed by the Republican-controlled legislature, decided to delay a vote because of questions as to whether Hannah-Jones had any prior teaching experience. When it became known that Walter T. Houseman Jr., the publisher of the Arkansas Democratic Gazette in Little Rock, Arkansas, who endowed the School of Journalism with $25 million, had written to members of the Board of Governors in opposition to granting Hannah-Jones tenure, Hannah-Jones threatened to sue the university, and the students and faculty began to protest. Sean Wilentz, who had previously criticized Hannah-Jones's scholarship, wrote in an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education saying that the Board of Governors should follow the faculty recommendation and grant Hannah-Jones tenure. It should be noted, however, that the Board of Governors has every right to make an independent decision in the tenure process. And Houseman never threatened to withdraw his funds from the School of Journalism. The only requirement in exchange for the grant, the School of Journalism agreed to name the school after him and post his core values on the wall of the school. The values included drawing a distinction between news and opinion with impartiality, which he defined as, quote, reporting, editing, and delivering the news honestly, fairly, and objectively, and without personal opinion or bias. In June 30th, the day before she was about to begin her appointment, the Board of Governors held an emergency meeting and decided to grant her tenure. However, a few days later, in an interview with Gayle King on CBS television, Hannah-Jones announced that she was refusing the position at UNC in favor of a professorship at Harvard University. In the interview, she mentioned that the New York Times had, quote, clarified, not corrected, the text of the 1619 Project to say that, quote, one of the primary reasons for the American Revolution was that some of the colonists had decided to break away from British Empire because in defense of slavery. But this is not merely a clarification. It was an assertion made with no supporting evidence. There's another way to view Hannah-Jones's controversy. In 1987, Republican President Ronald Reagan repealed the so-called Fairness Doctrine, under which the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, required holders of broadcast licenses to present controversial issues in a manner that were, quote, honest, equitable, and balanced, unquote. The repeal of the Fairness Doctrine enabled the rise of right-wing cable television networks such as Fox News that during the Trump administration fostered conspiracy theories and other forms of fake news. In reaction, other cable networks such as CNN and MSNBC began broadcasting one-sided refutations of false accusations made on Fox News and other right-wing television networks. Hausman's statement of core values was a throwback to the fairness doctrine, but some of the faculty at UNC School of Journalism threatened to remove Hausman's core values from its walls. And in August 2021, Susan King resigned as the dean of the School of Journalism. The Hannah-Jones controversy took on a new life with the rise of the teaching of critical race theory in the public schools. Critical race theory, or CTR, or CRT, has been traced back to the 1970s and 80s in the writings of the Harvard legal scholar Derek Bell. While not using the term critical race theory, Bell argued that contrary to the liberal interpretation of American legal history, which claimed a progression or progress from Reconstruction after the Civil War to the second Reconstruction during the Civil Rights Movement after World War II. Bell argued that racism was more entrenched in American society, first by the sharecropper and convict labor system after Reconstruction, and secondly by the mass incarceration of blacks after the Civil Rights Movement. His ideas were expanded in the 1990s by his students at Harvard, especially Kimberly Crenshaw and others, under the rubric of critical race theory. In this context, critical race theory became associated with the terms systematic racism in the criminal justice system and white privilege in society at large. One of the assertions is that there was a loophole in the 13th Amendment that banned slavery, quote, except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party shall have been duly convicted. However, this referred to imprisonment for crimes for which the person was duly convicted, not for mass incarceration. In July 2020, a conservative political activist named Christopher F. Rufo exposed in a slideshow from a corporate sensitivity session in Seattle, Washington, and based on this, he appeared on the Tucker Carlson's Fox News show. Subsequent to his appearance, Rufo was invited to Washington to confer with President Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who was a former Republican congressman from North Carolina. As a result of that meeting, President Trump decided to initiate in September 2020 a 1776 commission to support patriotic education in the schools. The commission had no historian specializing in American history. The chairman of the commission was Larry Amn, president of the conservative Hillsdale College, and the co-chair was Carol Swain, a former conservative law professor at Vanderbilt University. The commission issued its report on January 18, 2021, 2 days before the inauguration of President Joe Biden. The report restated the Republican agenda in education, namely a focus on reading, writing, and math, and instilling patriotism. Quote, the primary duty of schools is to teach students the basic skills needed to function in society, such as reading, writing, and mathematics. As discussed in Appendix 4, our founders also recognized a second and essential task. Educators must convey a sense of enlightened patriotism that equips each generation with a knowledge of America's founding principles, a deep reverence for their liberties, and a profound love of their country, unquote. The report was criticized by the American Historical Association for not having any professional historians on the commission, and Sean Wilentz described it as, quote, the flip side of those polemics in the 1619 Project, and, quote, basically a political document that reduced history to hero worship. Within hours of taking office, President Biden dissolved the commission. While Trump left office before this project took off the ground, it has not stopped state legislatures from politicizing the teaching of history in the primary and secondary schools. Rufo set up a tip line from which he learned that third graders in one school in Cupertino, California, were being asked to rank themselves and their classmates according to privilege. But many educators across the country claimed that critical race theory was not being taught in their schools. But this isn't completely true here in North Carolina. The Republican legislature reduced the teaching of American history to 1 year in order to create a 1-year required course in personal finance. It also sought to revise the 2010 social studies standards. They have gone through multiple drafts, including one that would have third grade students study how monuments such as Confederate statues are, quote, valued by their community, unquote. Another draft included words like systematic racism, systematic discrimination, and gender identity. And still another revision suggested by the Republican state school superintendent of schools, Catherine Truitt, was to replace an earlier draft, replace the terms systematic racism, systematic discrimination, and gender identity with the words racism, discrimination, and identity. She argued that using the term systematic racism would imply that U.S. government and Constitution are both racist. The changes were made in the final document. However, the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, a Republican African-American who was on the Board of Education, voted against the standards even with these revisions. He is now running for governor of the state of North Carolina as a Republican. Even still, the North Carolina social studies for teaching the 1-year course in high school were not really history standards. The first 7 standards pertain to 5 disciplines: inquiry, behavioral science, civics and government, economics, and geography. Only the last 3 are labeled history. 1, understand the reasons for American involvement in the conflicts and domestic foreign impacts. And 2, explain the causes and effects of various domestic conflicts in terms of race, gender, and political and economic and social factors. And 3, explain the causes and effects of various international conflicts and wars in terms of political, economic, and social factors. Among the objectives in the first of these standards is, quote, explain the causes and effects of various domestic conflicts in terms of race, gender, and political and economic and social factors. For the second standard, distinguish the extent to which American foreign policy has advanced the interest of historically privileged groups over the interest of historically marginalized groups, unquote. And the third, compare how competing historical narratives of various turning points portray individuals and groups, including marginalized people. Clearly, some of the language from the critical race theory has made its way into these standards. Furthermore, these meager history standards are social studies themes, not chronological history. In 2021, North Carolina history standards were far superior to the 2010 standards were far superior to the 2021. In other words, the 2021 North Carolina standards were far inferior to the 2010 standards, which required the teaching of North Carolina history in the 4th and 8th grade, and 2 courses in American history and 1 in world history in the high schools. Each had specific indicators of what to study in each of these courses. The North Carolina Board of Education added so-called unpacking documents in the 2021 standards with examples of chronological history topics and documents, but it defined these as possible curriculum content with a note that, quote, teachers should not feel limited to those examples that are provided in the document. They are suggestions only and do not prevent the teachers from teaching other examples, unquote. Now, the current 2024 version of the North Carolina Social Studies Standards for the public high schools, posted by the North Carolina Department of Education website, shows 2 years of chronological American history and 1 year of chronological world history. However, this doesn't seem to have been instituted in practice. For example, the high school curriculum currently at Chapel Hill High School requires 1 year of United States history, 1 year of world history, and 1 year course in economics and personal finance. In September 2021, the Republican-dominated North Carolina legislature passed a bill, while not mentioning critical race theory by name, that stated that the schools should not promote topics such as, quote, no race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, unquote, or, quote, an individual solely by virtue of his race or is inherently racist or sexist or oppressive, unquote, or that teachers should not promote anyone, quote, to feel discomfort, guilt, or any other form of psychological distress based on their race or sex, unquote. The bill required teachers to post their curriculum online at least 30 days before teaching it, unquote. Despite Democratic Governor Roy Cooper vetoed the bill, and it had little chance of being overridden at that time. However, other states have passed similar laws, and in the elections of 2022, the Republicans gained a veto-proof majority in both houses of the North Carolina legislature. And they introduced in 2023 another bill that prohibits the teaching that government, quote, is inherently racist or was created to oppress people of another race or sex. The language was based on a model from the Citizens for Renewing America, a conservative group founded by a former Trump administration official to rid the nation's schools of critical race theory. However, the bill is currently stalled. Nevertheless, in January 2023, the Board of Governors of the University of Carolina, appointed by the Republican-dominated Senate and Assembly, passed a resolution to create a new school whose mission was, quote, to promote democracy and building skills in public discourse. This was after a retreat of the board in the fall of 2020, in which the speaker was Michael Poliakoff of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, ACTA. ACTA was funded by the right-wing Olin Foundation, the Bradley Foundation, and the Koch Foundation, and it promotes free market fundamentalism, small government, privatization, and lower taxes on corporations and the wealthy. David Boliak, chairman then of the UNC Board of Governors, told Fox News that there is, quote, no shortage of left-of-center progressive views, unquote, on the UNC campus, and that the School of Civil Life and Leadership, quote, is an effort to remedy that. In April 2024, the Board of Trustees created the separate School of Civil Life and Leadership, and Jed Atkins, a scholar of classical studies at Duke University, was appointed as its first dean and director. The new School of Civil Life and Leadership seems to be modeled on the conservative think tank at the Claremont Institute, created in 1979 in Claremont, California. According to its website, its stated purpose is to teach, quote, the principles of American founding to future leaders and statesmen of America, including the foundation doctrine of natural rights and law found in the Declaration of Independence, the ingenious political science of the Constitution, and the popular constitutionalism or reverence necessary for the maintenance of a free government, unquote. Furthermore, the website states, quote, "We promote the application in the courts and among legal practitioners throughout our centers for constitutional jurisprudence," unquote. In other words, the legal doctrine of original intent as opposed to a living constitution that is dominant in the Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court today. Finally, the website states, quote, "Through our Center for the American Way of Life, which is devoted to restoring political liberty by arming the right with moral confidence, ideas, and new policies, while working to undermine the left's hold over American institutions and conscience," unquote. Now, I'm personally familiar with the roots of this kind of thinking. As a graduate student in American Studies at Claremont Graduate School in 1965 to 66, I took a course or a seminar on the Federalist Papers taught by political scientist Martin Diamond and colonial historian Douglas Adair. Diamond was a student of Leo Strauss at the University of Chicago, who was the intellectual godfather of neoconservatism. Strauss argued for a return to the classical philosophy of the ancient Greeks and a close reading of their texts. Adair and Diamond had us interpret the Federalist Papers as a primary source in terms of the thinking that influenced the Founding Fathers, including the Greek concept of democracy and Roman republicanism. This influenced my teaching at Rutgers Newark in the 1970s and my projects at the New Jersey Historical Commission by emphasizing the importance of interpreting primary source documents. However, at the Claremont Institute, this approach has taken on an indoctrination of right-wing politics. Most recently, in February 2024, the UNC Board of Trustees proposed that all undergraduates be required to take a course in civics that included readings of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers, as well as Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham jail. But this is no substitute for a course in American history. When I was an undergraduate at Rutgers University, every student in the School of Liberal Arts had to take a one-year course in American history and another in Western civilization. When I was teaching at Rutgers Newark, the Western civilization course was replaced by world history, which was a needed revision given the global economy and foreign policy that exists today. However, neither the 1619 Project nor critical race theory has gone away, and they have created a backlash that seeks to indoctrinate students in patriotism and American exceptionalism today. These will continue to be wedge issues in American education and politics in the foreseeable future.